everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I wanted to start before thanking our organizers. I'm aware I'm the last thing between your trains and buses and going home, so I'll keep it very brief because it was a very busy day. But I wanted to thank Will for inviting me. It serves me right. He did a great job reviewing an article for me and also doing similar kind of thing for a conference organized in Glasgow for an RSC network on evaluating digital cultural resources. So I think it was quite balanced, but also Glenn and Georgia for doing an amazing job with the whole organization. I think you would agree with me and their teams. I was very excited and quite surprised. I don't know what expected from a digital preservation conference. I've got my colorful creative badge. It wasn't just sort of dry topics, very, very important, but also just the technicalities. I think you would also agree it was a very rich, diverse, and really full day with a lot of multidisciplinary perspectives. I was very impressed. And I organized things like that in Glasgow with other partners on the university, smaller or larger, quite a lot the last few years. So I was very impressed how they managed to cram in a day a lot of different perspectives from all of us, bringing in the discipline of people working from a lot of different angles, from the academic to the practitioners, the digital, the more creative, the curatorial, and also do training and talks and more workshopy style, apart from the badges, as I said. I have a job in Glasgow where I'm a bit of a split personality. My job is I have a joint post at the University of Glasgow, but one half is a curatorial. I'm responsible for the digital strategy at the Hunterian, but I'm also, on the other half, a more traditional academic. I'm a senior lecturer in museum studies, so I teach and do research with a lot of digital and cultural heritage and various projects. So it was interesting for me, for both hats and several hats that I have, to draw out from all of you some of the things that we mentioned here. Before I just outlined some of them, I wanted to apologize because, very typical for a digital preservation conference, I decided, despite bringing my laptop, to take all my notes digitally on my iPhone, forgetting my charger at home. So halfway through the conference, it ran out of battery. Georgia and her team were so amazing. They provided me with a charger, and then when I was typing my last few notes, because I wanted to tweet and I thought it was quite more flexible to do it not on my laptop but on my iPhone, I dutifully deleted all my notes. So, creation of the physical object, let's not forget, I had to handwrite afterwards, reminding one of the points that Tanya made, I think earlier on from the British Museum team, that don't forget we need to create the things first before we curate, preserve, interpret, and all the other things. So apologies to some of you where I stopped tweeting. It wasn't that your talks were not interesting, I just had run out of juice. The other one was also to apologize that in order for the team, the organizers, to cram so many things, they had a lot of parallel sessions, so I couldn't create multiple copies of myself, and I only sort of went to some of the talks, and I only read the abstracts and had a look at the others. I thought it was interesting, though there were a lot of themes that struck me and threads underlying several talks from different perspectives. One of them, I think Glenn already mentioned at the beginning, Will referred to it and other speakers as well. Museums are relatively late in this game of digital preservation. Archives maybe and libraries have more experience, and other colleagues with archaeological data archives and other sort of cognate fields here. And that, you might think, is maybe a disadvantage, that some things are more advanced in other sectors. But it struck me also that this is also, at the same time, the other side of the coin. It has the flip side of being an advantage. There's more maturity now after all these years of this very active work. And museums have a lot to gain from all this, think of not jumping maybe on the train. It was interesting for me, maybe my first love starting from museums and archaeology, but also working increasingly, I think like most of you in the room, beyond these boundaries and working more across different kinds of collections with digital, the way digital always encourages breaking down these boundaries. It was interesting at the same time to see in today's conversation some of the quite museological, I think, discussions. And some of them definitely cut across the whole cultural heritage sector, but museums bring particular nuance and context, I think, to some of those. So when I talk about museological and also curatorial, It was interesting to hear about the aura of the digital and in different ways. Other speakers, not just Nicole Meehan, who first talked about this, also referred to it. How we were talking with Benjamin all these years ago about the aura of the original and mechanical reproduction, and the digital object is creating its own aura, and also because it's digital and with its ability to do infinite number of copies and also be experienced in different contexts. It was interesting to see about multivocality and how this, we have the potential, I think a big challenge, but definitely a potential as well, to try to incorporate and welcome all these different interpretations and experiences of the digital. Simon and others talked about value, not just the economic one. Valerie Johnson as well came back to this. And it's, I think, really useful points for reflection, how in all our fields, not just our collections, but the digital manifestations of our collections have amazing value, and we need to think of much more flexible ways of capturing that. And also how this is reflected not just in the sustainability and economic models. Predictably, for people working in cultural heritage, it was not just about collections and creating this. It was a lot of interesting points made about bringing in audiences. The way we all increasingly work with different kind of users, there were pleas or lessons learned, not quite getting dogmatic, but an encouragement for all of us working with collections and audience to be brave and embrace what the different audiences are bringing, their own interpretations, their own understanding of collections, sometimes surprising, completely unpredictable in some cases, not what we had thought about them, but also a lot of very good arguments today about the richness and the different layers that this can bring. There were no easy recipes. I think for a really good conference like this, there's no easy answers. How can you balance the curating after the collections, welcoming other perspectives and being fair in this process of what you keep and what you leave aside? And this selection process, what you keep, what are your criteria for selecting some of this, predictably again underline a lot of your talks. So how do we decide? Valerie mentioned, for example, that in some countries like Norway, there's national strategies. I come from Greece myself, and predictably and typically for Greece, we had a National Committee for Digitization in Cultural Heritage, I think just after the millennium, really early on, and didn't apply any of it. We're great on paper. We just don't do the things afterwards. But there's no easy answers there. Do we really need, is a strategy, a national, the way to go about it? I'm not so sure, but it's definitely an important point of how do we ensure that sometimes more obscure, smaller, more complex collections are also reflected in what we leave after us. Glenn quoted Tachuo Michiyama's title, Keep Changing, Connect with Everything, Continue Forever. I think museums have traditionally been very good with the last one, Continue Forever. The keep changing one, that digital, not just digital preservation, anything to do with digital, is pushing us to do constantly, do and do it well, is a bit more challenging. And I think, okay, in order to do what Georges-Henri Rivière, the traditional, the 1960s museologist, was talking about when he said that museums should be the mirror of society, in order for museums to continue to do this and do this well in an increasingly digital world, we need to become more flexible, we need to react more quickly, and we do need to embrace change. That doesn't mean that digital preservation, for example, it was clear today, is not just for larger, well-funded institutions. It's important to investigate the ways that smaller ones, sometimes the one-person organization, even the voluntary one, cannot afford not to think seriously about digital preservation issues. Organizations like the Digital Preservation Coalition are really doing a valuable work in this area. It's not just a shameless plug for Will for inviting me. I think it was very clear to all of us the strength of the conference today because it was two key important institutions working together in partnership. And I think that's a message for all of us for the future. You notice the way I did with my tweets, it wasn't just the initials of the conference. Is it there? But you all have it anyway. There's 2018 at the end, and apart from creating 4 more characters for the tweets and making our life difficult, I think there was a hidden message there. It's just the first of many. Or even if there wasn't a hidden message there, that's what I would like to suggest, I think, for all of us to continue the conversation. There were no recipes, there were no clear straitjackets about how we should do this. And I think it's very important for digital preservation to work to really respect the context of each organization, the collections, the staff, the audiences, and this is really quite a complicated business. So I think one of the best ways forward is to keep the conversation going. I definitely had the feeling today that there's a community of practice, a very vibrant, multidisciplinary, diverse community, and I think it's very important that we keep the conversation going. So I was going to suggest that not necessarily Glasgow, as was suggesting to me over coffee, would love to host something like this, but it's not just Glasgow, it's a lot of us in the room, all of us working in this field. It would be important, I think, to find ways, digitally and on the web. There were many people who couldn't make it today who were really interested, physically as well as virtually. We need to keep on talking about these issues because it's really important for all this thing. Keep changing, but continue forever in order to be able to match the two and do the full circle. I think keeping the discussion going is one of the most important ones. So I'll stop here by asking you to join me in thanking the organizers for organizing such a great day.